Welcome to this explainer. We are diving straight into a massive puzzle from ancient law today to see exactly how highly analytical jurists handled cases of fundamental, unsolvable uncertainty. It is an absolute masterclass in legal logic, and we're going to break it down step by step.
So the crucial question we're starting with is this. If a fundamental legal fact in a case is completely unknowable, how on earth does a judge decide who wins? To really understand this, imagine a very specific scenario. A person converts to a new faith, and as part of his new obligations, certain taxes or gifts now apply to his property. Say he owns a cow, and this cow is slaughtered. The law states that if the cow is slaughtered after his conversion, he owes specific, valuable cuts of meat to the priest. But if it was slaughtered before, he owes nothing. Here's the catch, though. Absolutely no one knows if the slaughter happened just before or just after the conversion. The timing is a total mystery.
What do? Well, the ancient courts issued a very clear initial ruling here. The owner of the cow is exempt. Because the priest simply cannot definitively prove the slaughter happened after the conversion, the court ruled leniently. They let the convert keep those valuable cuts of meat. And honestly, the logic seems pretty sound, right? The burden of proof rests upon the claimant. If the priest wants the meat, he has to prove he's actually entitled to it.
But this brings us to a clash of precedents, comparing the priest's gifts to the poor's gleanings.
This is where the legal mystery truly begins, because that lenient ruling immediately creates a massive logical problem when we compare it to another firmly established precedent from the exact same era. Think about a case involving the poor's gleanings. The law says that grain dropped during a harvest must be left for the poor. Now, what happens if grain is found near ant holes in a field and its origin is completely uncertain? Did the ants drag it there before the harvest, which would mean it belongs to the owner, or did it fall during the harvest, meaning it belongs to the poor? In this specific case of uncertainty, the law rules stringently. The grain must go to the poor. The owner is obligated. So why on earth is the cow case ruled leniently, but the grain case is ruled stringently? It seems completely inconsistent.
Let's look at the presumptive status theory, which traces the original state of the property.
To solve this glaring contradiction, an ancient scholar named Rava stepped up. He proposed the theory of presumptive status. Basically, this is the legal assumption that an item retains its previously established legal state until it's definitively proven otherwise. Rava argued that when facts are murky and a judge is stuck, they just need to default to the item's last known legal condition. It acts like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty.
When we actually apply this theory, the convert's cow had a presumptive status of being exempt. Before he converted, there was zero obligation on that cow. So, since we don't know when it was slaughtered, we just default to its original state, exempt. But look at the standing crop. Before a field is even harvested, there's this looming, built-in obligation that parts of it will eventually go to the poor. Its presumptive status is obligated. So, when uncertainty strikes the grain near those ant holes, we default to the obligation. Rava's theory works beautifully here. The contradiction is totally solved. Or, well, so it seems.
But then we run into the problem with dough. This is Abaya's devastating counter-argument.
Rava's idea feels like a watertight legal theory. But in these ancient academies, absolutely no theory goes untested. Another scholar named Aliyah completely shatters Rava's framework by pointing out a devastating flaw regarding dough prepared for baking. See, if dough is prepared by a person before their conversion, it's exempt from the religious priestly portions. Its presumptive status is exempt, exactly like the cow. Therefore, according to Rava's theory, if the timing of the dough's preparation is uncertain, the ruling should be lenient, right? It should be exempt. But it isn't. The established law actually dictates that if the timing of the dough is uncertain, the court rules stringently, and the convert is completely obligated to separate the portion. Rava's theory of presumptive status just completely collapses under the weight of this dough case.
So, Rava pivots to a grand unifying theory, distinguishing between religious and civil stakes.
What does Rava do? He takes this critique, goes back to the drawing board, and realizes he was looking at the problem from the wrong angle entirely. It's not about the timeline of the property at all. The really crucial point is the severity of the legal domain we are operating in. We have to define whether a prohibition is a strict Torah law, something carrying immense cosmic weight, or if it's merely a civil dispute over money. If it's a severe religious prohibition, the stakes are ultimate and we must rule stringently. But if it's merely a monetary debt, it's just civil law. That means the burden of proof is on the claimant and we rule leniently.
Applying this new framework to Abaya's dough case changes everything. Consuming unseparated dough isn't just a fine or some sort of tax. It involves a severe religious prohibition, a strict Torah law carrying the ultimate punishment, death at the hand of heaven. The stakes of the Doe case are considered literally life and death, and this is exactly why the court must abandon any leniency. When a potential heavenly punishment is on the line, you do not take risks. You rule strictly.
Conversely, let's jump back to our original mystery with the convert's cow. Failing to give a priest a cut of meat from a slaughtered cow doesn't actually violate a sacred prohibition. If you don't give it, you aren't facing death at the hand of heaven. It simply means you owe someone money. It is strictly a monetary debt. And in civil law, the universal rule applies. If you want to extract money from someone, you have to bring proof. Since the priest has absolutely no proof of the timing, the convert wins.
Now, let's test this theory across the legal spectrum using the 8 uncertainties of the convert.
To really stress test this dichotomy, the text examines a definitive list known as the 8 uncertainties of the convert. The first 4 cases here involve issues like a wife's birth offering, the famous doe portion we talked about, and the firstborn of both kosher and non-kosher animals. What do they all have in common? Every single one of these involves a severe religious prohibition, whether it's eating sanctified items improperly or deriving forbidden benefit. Because they all fall under the category of a strict prohibition, the ruling for every single one of them is universally stringent. The convert is obligated. The theory is holding strong.
Now, consider the second half of the list, dealing with monetary matters, like the first sheared wool of a sheep. This sparks some really deep, highly analytical debate in the text. We have to figure out, does the obligation of the first shearing rest upon the person of the owner, or is it an inherent debt of the property itself? This distinction is absolutely critical. Why? Because if the owner actually dies before the shearing takes place, an obligation of the person just disappears with them. But a debt of the property? That remains permanently attached to the wool. The ancient texts classify this cleanly as a monetary debt, not a strict Torah law prohibition. And because it's just a monetary debt, the priest is simply a civil claimant with no proof. The exact same logic goes for the gifts of the cow's meat and the monetary redemptions of a firstborn son or donkey. Therefore, all of these monetary uncertainties universally result in a lenient exemption for the convert.
Which brings us to Rava's brilliant ultimate conclusion. Whenever there is an uncertainty with regard to a prohibition, the halakha is to be stringent. Whenever there is an uncertainty with regard to monetary matters, the halakha is to be lenient. By looking past the surface-level facts of cows, crops, and wool, these ancient jurists deduced a universally applicable framework for handling the unknown. They categorized the very nature of the law itself.
And that leaves us with a truly fascinating question to end on. Think about our modern legal system today. We have a very sharp distinction between civil court, where you really just need a preponderance of evidence because it's just about money, and criminal court, where the stakes are a person's liberty or life, so we demand proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Does this modern architecture owe its philosophical roots to this ancient, highly analytical pursuit of justice? It's pretty amazing to realize that thousands of years ago, jurists were already recognizing that when the facts are fundamentally unknowable, the only way to deliver justice is to weigh the severity of the law itself. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. I really hope this sparked your curiosity, and I encourage you to keep exploring the deep logic behind the laws that shape our world.